Well, welcome to the latest episode of the Manda Hadley podcast. In this episode, we're going to explore lasting powers of attorney, or LPAs, including what they are, why you may need to have one, and what it entails to actually put one together. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Rachel Gadsden, Private Client Executive in our Wills, Probate and Older Client Services team, who's going to help us get a full understanding of LPAs. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
Could you start us off really by explaining what is a lasting power of attorney?
Yeah, it's a legal document that allows someone the power to appoint someone, whether it be a family member, a friend, a professional, such as a solicitor or an accountant, to act on their behalf if they're not able to make decisions for themselves anymore, whether that be through injury, illness, sort of old age sometimes, that they just can't manage. And it then lets them know that their things could be managed in a certain way, as they would want it managed had they been able to manage it themselves.
So is there more than one type of LPA?
Yes, there's two. So it covers all aspects of your life, really. There's one that covers property finances, so anything to do with banks, investments, bills, your property, and then one that covers health and welfare. And this can be really quite wide-ranging, actually. Anything to do from if you need care at home, if you need care in a residential setting, if you need decisions about medication, operations, anything sort of day-to-day life, really. The health and welfare one can only be used when you haven't got capacity anymore. So while you're still able to make your own decisions, you do make them. Whereas the property one is a bit more flexible and can be used while you've got capacity, but only with your consent. So you still stay in control of decisions, but you give them the authority to act. For example, if you're, I don't know, bedbound from an operation or something like that, you can then know that your affairs are still being managed well while you can't do it yourself.
Okay, so why might I, for example, want an LPA?
Well, anyone, I believe anyone should have one, and it gives you the control, and you retain the control over who is looking after things for you, whether that be your money, your care, your welfare. No one knows what's going to happen in the future. A lot of people kind of consider them as an elderly document, and people like their grandparents or parents should have them. But no one knows whether you're going to get into an accident or something could happen to you that's unexpected that could change your mental capacity or your ability to manage things. So everyone really should have one. It's a bit like an insurance policy, really. So if anything does happen, you've got the provisions there to help you if you need assistance. And it's to give you the control mainly, because if you don't have one, which a lot of people will say, well, if I don't have one, what happens really? Then if you don't have one and something happens that your mental capacity changes and you can't manage your own affairs, your family, friends, or solicitors would have to apply to the Court of Protection to obtain what's called a deputyship order, and the court then makes the decision as to who will manage your finances and welfare concerns. So you lose the power. If you don't make one, you're leaving it up to the court to decide, whereas if you have one, you're in control of it.
Okay, so how do you go about creating an LPA?
So a solicitor can draft one for you, and they can take your instructions and make sure that it's correctly executed, that everything's in place properly, because they're quite a long document to draft. So you want to make sure that it's all correct and registered properly as well. You can make them yourself via the government website. You don't have to go to a solicitor. However, there are risks with that. You also have to find what's called a certificate provider, which is part of the document, which a solicitor would do if they were drafting it for you. And you can have errors. I've had to correct a lot of errors in powers of attorney that have not been prepared by solicitors, and have then had difficulty in using them when they've come to use them. So it's just making sure that care and attention's taken when they're drafted. So using a solicitor would be the best option to ensure that everything's correctly done.
Okay, understand. Now, obviously, lasting power of attorney means choosing an attorney. So what considerations do you need to make when you're actually choosing that person?
Now, this is probably the most obviously important part of it. You need to give big consideration to people that you trust and that will make the best decisions for you in your best interests, and someone that knows you quite well. I mean, there are certain situations where people haven't got family and friends that can act for them, and in certain circumstances, solicitors will act for them. But you need to make sure that if you're appointing someone, that they won't abuse the power that you're giving them, and that they will act in your interest, will act in your instructions if you provide them. And if you're appointing more than one, you need to make sure they can work together, because they possibly will have to in the future. So, you know, if you've got children that disagree or family members that disagree, be very careful if you're going to appoint them together that they will act in the best interests of you. You can appoint different people for your finances and different people for your health and welfare. So if you think some people are better suited to managing finances, or some people are better suited to managing your health and welfare needs, then you can appoint different people if you want to. They don't have to be the same.
And am I able to place instructions on those attorneys as well?
Yes. So there is a section within a power of attorney that you can give what's called preferences and instructions. So preferences don't have to be followed, but your attorneys must consider them if you put them in. So this might be that I would prefer to stay at home if I can, from a health and welfare point of view. If possible, I'd prefer to receive care at home rather than go into a residential setting. But it can be wide ranging from your diet, that you'd want to follow a certain diet or follow a certain faith, or that from a financial point of view, you only prefer to invest in certain companies if that's your kind of financial situation, or that you don't, if you've got a property, you don't want your property sold unless absolutely necessary. From an instructions point of view, if you provide instructions, they have to be followed. So they have to be given very much consideration and specific consideration when they're drafted. Because if your views change to what you've put in the instructions part of your power of attorney, and you don't want that to happen anymore, you've got to change your whole power of attorney. So it's something that has to be considered. A lot of people don't put instructions in because they've chosen their attorneys very carefully, and they know what their wishes would be, they know what they would want to happen, and they're happy to follow those. But some people want a very specific instruction putting in that might be quite niche, or if they're appointing solicitors, for example, to give them a bit more direction because they won't know the ins and outs of everything. So they can be put in. You just have to be very careful of how you word them and what effect they will have down the line when your power of attorney comes into place.
Okay. And do you also need to have replacements lined up as well? So replacement attorneys?
It's recommended. It depends how many original attorneys you're appointing. So you can appoint up to 4, and they can either act jointly or what's called joint and severally, which means they can act together or on their own, depending on the circumstances, which is, you know, more flexible. If you appoint them jointly, and one of them passes away or then becomes mentally incapable themselves and cannot act for you, the whole power of attorney would fail unless you've got a replacement attorney as backup. Also, if you only appoint one attorney, which often people do, whether it's a husband and wife or partner in general, or just one child, and something happens to that attorney, if there's no replacement, then again, the power of attorney would fail. So if you're putting in replacements, they don't have automatic authority over anything. They would only step in when your original attorneys can't act for you anymore. And again, you can appoint up to 4. If you appoint too many people, it can get a bit busy and it can get a bit too many people kind of get involved with it. But you can effectively appoint up to 4 if you want to.
Okay, so what does the role of an attorney actually entail? What do they have to do?
Okay, so it depends if they're appointed as a property and finances attorney or a health and welfare attorney. From a property point of view, they have the authority to look after your bank accounts, make sure that they're operating properly, any bills are settled, any investments are sort of keep going or whether they need to be sold depending on the circumstances. They can reinvest for you. So say you have a sum of money, they can choose an investment or put it in a certain savings account. They also have authority over your property. So if it needs to be sold for possibly care home fees or it's not suitable for you anymore, they would have the authority to do that. But they also have the authority to buy another property. So if it was just to facilitate a house move, they would be able to deal with that for you. If you have rental properties, they can take over on your behalf as a landlord and ensure that the tenancies are running properly. And anything abroad as well. Now, there's a caveat on foreign assets. We can guarantee the use of a power of attorney in the UK. We can't guarantee that it will be able to be used abroad. So while you might have assets abroad that need managing, you've got to be very careful that you might need another document in that country, depending on their requirements.
Yeah.
From a health and welfare point of view, quite wide ranging what they can and can't do or what they have to undertake. Like I said previously, it only comes into effect when you haven't got capacity anymore. So it might be that it's deciding whether you need care, whether that be at home or in a residential setting, whether you need a certain operation that you can't consent to, they can consent on your behalf, certain medication that you might need. And then it's day-to-day things like how you dress, what sort of food you eat if needed, and whether a certain diet needs following. And if you follow a certain religion or beliefs, it can be ensuring that you still can follow that if possible. So it's very wide ranging on what they have to do, which is why the consideration of who is your attorney is so important to ensure that all those things are done in line with what you would want.
Okay, so just to round us off, really, Rachel, how can you and how can Manda Hadley help with an LPA?
So we can draft them, we can prepare them for you and ensure that any instructions that you want to put within the power of attorney or preferences are worded correctly, so they're not rejected by the court, because that can happen. Ensure that they're executed properly, because that's another part where a lot of errors go wrong if people draft them themselves and not executed properly and then they get returned by the court. And just provide advice if people want advice on them as to their effects, as to the pitfalls of them as well, because they're not soundproof, they're not, things can go wrong. So if you get us to draft them or just advise on them, we can then make sure that you're fully informed of everything so you can make the decision. And it's very understandable that people are very wary of making powers of attorney, because they're handing power over to someone else to manage their money, to manage their welfare needs, and that is totally understandable. But if you get the correct advice and give it the correct considerations, which we can obviously assist you with, then it gives you the reassurance that should something happen to you, the right people are there to protect you and look after you if needed.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Rachel. As with all of our podcasts, details of how to contact Rachel, how to contact anyone at Manda Hadley will be alongside here with our editor's notes. Great. Thanks, Rachel. Really informative, and look forward to the next one.
Thank you.